Welcome to Living Transplant,
the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the transplant program at Toronto General Hospital
and brings you open and honest conversations about the transplant experience.
My name is Courtney, and I'm the Communications Specialist for the Center for Living Organ Donation.
And my name is Brittany. I'm a bedside nurse in the Ajmera Transplant Center.
Full disclosure, we are not physicians.
No, and we are not here to give you medical advice.
Think of us like your guides through the world of transplant as we know it.
Whether transplant is your past, present, or future, your passion, or your curiosity,
Living Transplant will show you the world of transplant like you've never seen it before.
Welcome back to Living Transplant. We're back to hearts this week, and we're exploring a new perspective, caregivers.
Yeah, perspective we've definitely wanted to explore for some time. Caregivers are so important. This story is actually the first transplant story I heard when I joined the program. Heather, who we're speaking to today, is my colleague. And I remember my first day at UHN, we went out for lunch together and I heard a little bit of her story. And then, gradually over the 2+ years that we've worked together, I heard the full story and it really never stops blowing my mind. So I'm excited to share it.
Don't want to give too much away, but to give a little snapshot, Heather shares the story of her and her husband, Jamie, relocating from St. John's, Newfoundland for Jamie's heart transplant. After an unsuccessful surgery, Heather ultimately decided to permanently move to Toronto, got a job with the transplant program at the Center for Living Organ Donation, and started her PhD on patients and caregivers who have to relocate for transplant.
So it's obvious from that description that Heather lives and breathes transplants. And because of that, this interview was really long, like nearly 3 hours long. Part of that is because the three of us are incredibly chatty and could literally talk forever. But another part is
podcast.
Yeah, it's perfect. But another part of that was just there was so much to cover, right? So for the sake of the listeners, we broke it up into 2 episodes. Part 1, which you're about to hear, is the story of Heather and Jamie, and it focuses on Heather's personal experience. And then part 2 will focus on Heather's PhD research, which was inspired by her personal experience, along with some more personal insights on the caregiver experience.
Yeah, this is a good one. I mean, but like which one isn't? But this is a really good one. Like Brittany sobs. We all cried.
We all cried. Yeah, Courtney has a heart and shed multiple tears in this one. Except for Heather. Yeah, which is why we get along so well at work, I think.
Sit back, enjoy, put your headphones on, turn up that volume, enjoy the show.
Welcome back to Living Transplant. We have a very exciting guest today. She is my work bestie or work wife, if you will, the lovely Heather Lannon, who is the outreach coordinator for the Center for Living Organ Donation. Welcome, Heather.
Thanks, Courtney. I'm excited to be here today.
So I might have just spoiled it a little bit, but we'll start with your favorite question. What is your connection to transplant?
And you totally did steal half my introduction. But that's okay. That's okay. That's only part of my connection. So I'll just backstep it a little bit and kind of give you, I guess, a blurb of how I got into transplant, because really I ended up being your work bestie by probably 10 years before that. So my first, I guess, real introduction to transplant before I knew anything about Toronto General or working there with you was actually through my husband. My husband, Jamie, was born with a congenital heart defect, transposition of the great arteries for all those medical gurus who understand that jargon. But basically, his heart was reversed. So the right part was doing the job of the left part, and the left part was doing the job of the right. So he had a procedure when he was about a year old. It was called the mustard procedure. And interesting enough, it was developed just across the street from us at Sick Kids. And that procedure at the time, it was back in the 70s, they assumed this was great. The kids were going to get this procedure. They were going to be fixed, healed, go on and live a normal life. That actually wasn't the case. And what they found out, as these children aged and time moved on, was that, the procedure basically, I guess in layman's terms, is it wore out. So once a child hit, or a young adult by this point hit about 30, they started to have all kinds of issues, things that we see in heart patients regularly, the shortness of breath, the palpitations, vomiting, that whole piece about, not being able to lie flat on your back and kind of feeling like there's like an elephant is sitting on your chest, like there's something really, really pressing on top of you and preventing you from breathing.
When did Jamie start presenting with those symptoms?
So he was pretty accurate in terms of when we usually see our congenital patients present. So he was just about 30. He was going to turn 30. And that's usually around the time that we see those patients start to have issues, those mustard procedure patients. And, like many people with heart failure, it took a really long time to get a clear diagnosis. Even though he was a heart patient, I don't think anybody really realized until he was in real trouble that it was actually heart failure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they just found, like, when did they find out that the mustard procedure actually starts to wear out? Was that after kind of Jamie went through everything that he went through, or was that before?
Yeah, he was born at a really interesting time. I'm sure many people will remember, blue babies who were born and they had that blue tinge, especially around the lips. Maybe their fingers were blue. So that would have been like 50s, 60s. And by no means am I a cardiologist whatsoever. This is how I've interpreted it and learned it over the years. So Jamie was one of those blue babies. And in the 50s and 60s, those folks were born and there was no treatment for them. They usually died very shortly after birth or as a small infant. And then the 70s came along and Dr. Mustard at Sick Kids devised this procedure. And then 80s came along and another procedure was developed. So if he was born in the 50s or 60s, he probably wouldn't have survived. And then if he had to be born in the following decade in the 80s, he would have had a completely different procedure. So it's really interesting how medicine and things change.
So do babies that are born with this congenital heart defect now, do they still get the mustard procedure or do they just get a heart transplant?
So, and that's a great question, Britt, because things have even progressed now. And we're highly connected to Sick Kids being just next door. But what I have heard is that there's actually procedures developed now at Sick Kids where this condition can be corrected while the child is still inside the mom's belly.
Vitro.
Yes, there you go. I was like, you got the right word down. They do some kind of surgery while the baby's inside, and they correct it, and the baby comes out with no.
Isn't that sorry? Like, just take a second first. Like, isn't that wild? Like, back in the 50s, 60s, it was like, oh, sorry, don't know what to do about this one. And then in the 80s, they come up with this surgical procedure and they're like, okay, we're getting somewhere. And now they're like, pause. Let's just fix this before the baby's even born.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It's insane that they can. How does that even, I don't know, maybe that's a whole, well, it's not transplant related, but maybe that's a rabbit hole I'll go down of how do they do in, what did you say? Vitro.
In vitro.
I was going to say in utero, but that's the Nirvana album.
Oh, well, yeah.
Same thing.
Is it in utero?
In utero is just like the uterus. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's in utero. Damn. It's in utero. Yeah, sorry for our listeners. I'm a fool. It's in utero. It's totally in utero.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, but definitely I'm not an expert by no means, but this is what I've heard. And I'm sure as we continue talking today, you are a patient or you're a caregiver, or you're involved, you kind of pick up all these tidbits as you go. And these were some of the things that, I either learned through researching myself or talking to, the medical team, or, even sometimes you see on the news, like these amazing, cool new things that are coming out. So yeah, I would definitely tell people to research it more, because by far and wide, I am not a expert in that field at all, but it's definitely really fascinating.
It's so, I mean, you are an expert in your own way. It's not your level of your field of expertise where you can, give other people advice. But I think caregivers are experts in a certain way. Patients are experts in a certain way. Like, even if it is just of their own experience of a condition or a disease, I think that really does have to be acknowledged. But going back to the timeline, Jamie starts presenting with heart failure symptoms and he's around 30. Where are you guys at this point? Like, have you've met and stuff, right?
Yeah. So interesting enough. And, it's funny how things play out when you look at things retrospectively. But yeah, so we had just met around that time. And like I said, he was about 29 going on 30, and I was 24. And that's when he got sick. And, the running joke always was, his heart couldn't handle me. That was our kind of our little, but yeah, we were in Newfoundland at the time. That's where we were both from. We were dating at the time when he started to get sick. That later led to an engagement. And then things just continued to kind of progress in terms of illness. When the shortness of breath happened, maybe it would be, every couple of months or something like that. And then as time moved on, you'd notice, hey, like now it's when he's walking upstairs. It used just to be when he was walking a long distance, or you'd see he was sleeping with one pillow a couple months ago. Now it's 2 or 3 because he can't lie flat on his back. So it was a very gradual kind of progression. It wasn't like one of those illnesses that, you're fine one day and then it like knocks you off your feet.
When he presented with all those symptoms, how did it come to the point where you were like, we need to go to the hospital, like something needs to change?
So he was being followed by GP cardiology, like general cardiology. And, for people who don't or aren't familiar with Newfoundland, the availability of specialists is pretty slim. It's a very small province. Here we have Peter Munck Cardiac Center, a whole center for heart failure. We don't have that equivalent back in Newfoundland. So there's many, 911 calls, ambulance visits. There was many, presenting at the ER. There was hospital admissions and, a lot of, I think, misdiagnosis. So things from asthma and puffers and chest infections and pneumonia and antibiotics and all this kind of stuff. And it just came to a head. I really think Jamie got sick of being sick. And he presented at Emerge and was very assertive, I think, in saying, I'm not leaving here until somebody finds out there's something wrong. And, sometimes you really need to be that strong advocate for yourself. And I think, Courtney, you said a few minutes ago, like nobody is an expert in your body but you. Like you're an expert of your body, your symptoms, your condition, what's normal for you. And I think that really was kind of the moment where things started to change and he started to get some clearer cut answers about what was going on.
And when was the first time the two of you heard the word the words heart transplants?
And it's so interesting because, we'll get into my research and almost every single person that I spoke to, I did lots of interviews with patients and caregivers, and they could explain this moment so perfectly. Like it was one of those moments that stood out. And for us, it wasn't the word transplant. We were in Newfoundland and it was the physician coming in and saying, there's nothing else I can do for you here. You need to go to Toronto. We can't do anything else. So that whole thought of, oh my God, this must be really bad. Like if they can't do anything here and they're going to send us to, the big city, like, Toronto is so far away, it must be really, really serious. So that was about 2 weeks before we were getting married that we were told that. And he was inpatient. He was in an ICU bed in Newfoundland. And they called the medevac flight and put him on him and sent him here. And luckily we ended up at Toronto General where, they were able to stabilize him and properly diagnose. And I think it was very shortly after that, a fellow came to speak to us about transplant and kind of said, you will require a transplant. And I remember just sitting there and being kind of like, a transplant? Like, you hear about it on TV and you see it in like, Grey's Anatomy or House or any of these medical shows, but you're sitting there and it was just such a foreign concept. I really do give kudos to the team because they did get him well enough to give him a pass and send us back to Newfoundland. And 36 hours after discharge, we got married in Newfoundland.
Fantastic.
It was wonderful. Really, it was the most stress-free wedding ever. I really was very chill and was just so happy to be there and that it was actually happening. And then after that, we had to come back. And I jokingly tell people we checked into the beautiful Toronto General for our honeymoon because that's exactly what we did. Real romantic accommodations.
And dinner is served and it'll be dinner for one and you can
Yep, real lovely couples paradise. But yeah, so after that, we were really lucky that the team was able to monitor us remotely. So we went back to Newfoundland for about 2 years. And in the 2 years, we flew back and forth here for appointments. We made 10 trips in 2 years to come back to checkups and tests and all that kind of stuff. And then finally in 2014, we, were told that the care he required was something that really needed us to relocate. He had more frequent visits, more frequent appointments, and, it was getting close to transplant time. So we came back October 2014, we moved. And it really was hard for many, many reasons. And I'll get into that piece later. But when we got here, things just went downhill very quickly. He ended up, having a code blue incident, thyroidectomy, pacemaker, defibrillator, and then finally the LVAD in 2015. So he had the Cadillac of stuff, to say the least.
Full menu.
Yeah, the full sample of everything you could think of.
God. And how long were you guys in Toronto before you got the call for a transplant? And did you ever get any kind of false alarms?
No false alarms. Very, very lucky. No false alarms. So we came to Toronto in 2014. At that time, he didn't qualify for transplant. He had really high pulmonary pressures in his lungs, which made him not eligible. So that's why he ended up with the LVAD, to try and decrease those pressures and also to act as a bridge to transplant. And he had his LVAD 2015 to 2016. The pressures were still really high. They were coming down slowly. And then he went on the transplant list in 2016 and got his call in 2017. So it was just about 2.5 years that we were here. But no false calls or trial runs, as people call them. Very, very lucky. The call was the actual call, the real call. Yeah.
Can you just side note for some of our listeners? Can you explain what an LVAD is?
Like me?
Coles Notes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Coles
definitely
Notes.
Not me. Yeah.
Like me. You want me to talk about this?
Yeah.
So for people who don't know or aren't familiar with the LVAD, it stands for left ventricular assisted device. And, I mentioned right in the beginning that Jamie was a little bit unique, where his heart was reversed. So he actually had an RVAD, not an LVAD.
I was about to right. Yeah, right.
Yeah. He had an LVAD that was acting as an RVAD, and it used to throw people off all the time. Like when the echo technicians had come to do the echo, they'd be like, looking around with their little wand, and they're like totally confused. But yeah, he was reversed. So he had an RVAD, really. But it's basically a pump. It takes over the pumping action of the heart. It's an open heart surgery. It's a very big surgery. They put a cylinder inside your chest where your heart is. It takes over the pumping action. So it kind of gives your heart a break because your heart is kind of wearing out. And then there's a drive line, a wire that comes down inside of you, comes out through your belly. There's a hole in your belly. And then that is hooked up to a controller, which is basically the brains of the pump. It's like a mini computer. It'll tell you your flow, your speed, your RPMs, battery power. And if there's something wrong, it'll come up on the display and say, like, go to the ER or call the doctor or whatever. And then it has 2 batteries, and the batteries have to be charged at all times. So you walk around with like a laptop bag, basically, if you were carrying a laptop case at all times. It doesn't come off ever. And then in the nighttime, you plug it in like a cell phone and charge it. So the joke was, I used to charge my husband overnight because I plugged him in.
I feel like
right?
you two are so funny. Like Heather and Jamie, she showed me pictures. They had a photo shoot with the LVAD or RVAD where they treated it like it was like a new baby, and they like have all these pictures.
Yeah. So yeah, and humor. Like Jamie was the funniest person that I've ever met. And yeah, we did. We had this photo shoot. Like, you see new parents welcoming the new baby to the family, and they have that. We had our baby, and we named it. The VAD was Lennon. Jamie was a Beatles fan, so we named Lennon. And we had a full-fledged family photo shoot. It was awesome. And I got to give kudos to a friend of ours, is a professional photographer, and she did the pictures for us, and she put them up on her blog. And the amount of traffic that the blog saw. And it was a really great way to like normalize something that was so, here's a guy going around with his heart in a bag and a tube coming out of him and batteries and a plug and all this kind of stuff. And I think it was a really great way to, show that, hey, this is normal. And here's our new addition, Lennon. Yeah, we used to have birthday parties for him too. Yeah, you sure can. Yeah.
I want to, can we link to them?
Yeah, we can put those in the show notes.
The episode.
Yeah.
I need to see them.
Jamie also wrote a really spectacular song that I've had the pleasure of hearing a recording where the chorus is, I love you from the bottom of my pump, which
Yeah, he was a musician.
Goodness.
So yeah, one of his coping mechanisms was music and all that kind of stuff. And he wrote about our time here, and that was how the song ended. It was called Heart Pump Blues. It was a blues jazz type recording.
So good. It's so good.
And yeah, Courtney, I'm happy to share the full length thing if you want to link to that.
Great.
But yeah, that's what he always used to tell me. It's like, Heather, I love you from the bottom of my pump. Always. So
phenomenal.
So what happened after you got the call for transplants? How did those events play out?
Yeah, so the transplant call was totally unexpected. It's funny, you're on the list, but when you get the call and you're still very like panicked and like, oh my God, this is happening. So yeah, it came. It's funny. I remember, like, again, this is another moment that I remember so clearly. It came just on a Thursday afternoon. It was leading up to the May long weekend, the May 24th weekend, that Thursday before. His cardiologist, who had followed him since he got the VAD, she always wanted to be the person who called him, and she did. So that was really, really sweet to have her do that. And we were fortunate. A lot of people get that call and then they're in the, like this panic, like I got to get to the hospital and I only got this amount of time. And, it's a big rush, but we don't know the circumstances of the donor or where the heart came from, but we knew that the surgery wouldn't be until the Saturday. So we had a day and a bit to kind of prepare, which I think was fantastic because it allowed our family to come from Newfoundland and be here. And it also kind of allowed us to organize things. I was working, so I was actually teaching and like organize my class and getting someone to substitute and that kind of thing. So he went to the hospital on the Thursday, checked in. Friday, he did all that, like that pre-op stuff you have to do. They ask you all these questions and make you sign all these forms and you see 500 million people. It seems like they all come and ask you stuff. And then the Saturday morning was the surgery. So he went to surgery. I had been told, and we had been told that it would be a lengthy surgery because they would have had to take the LVAD or RVAD out, which is kind of a process in itself, and then put the new heart in. And because he had his VAD for just over 2 years, I believe, they anticipated a lot of scar tissue and that it would be a very tedious process to get that out. He went into surgery 8 or 9 in the morning. He was the first case, and I didn't see anybody probably till about lunchtime. And they told me that, they got the VAD out. It had taken a lot longer than expected. And somebody would come back out again and see me when the new heart was in. I didn't see anybody until, and when we talk about grief and things like that, this is one of the things that frustrates me beyond belief is there's lots of pieces that I don't have a very clear recollection. Like I struggle with day and time and who was there and what actually happened sometimes. But yeah, the surgeon came out. It was probably 10 or 11 in the night. It was very late. And, I knew this surgeon. We've had him before, had a wonderful relationship with him. I actually used to call him McDreamy from Grey's because I thought he was handsome. So he came out and there was several of us there. I would say there was, 12, 15 people there in that waiting room. And, I remember looking at him and just saying, oh, Ed, it's done. Like I knew him well enough to call him by his first name. And he just kind of said, you need to come talk to me. And I'm like, no, we're all family. It's all good. We can, you can share. And he's like, no, you need to come and talk to me. And I didn't clue in. I don't know why. I didn't clue in that there was going to be an issue. But he took me to this little room off the waiting room. And, I remember sitting there. I remember looking at him. There was a soccer game on the TV, which is weird, but I remember, I don't know what he said. The only things I can remember him saying is, we don't know if we can get him off the table alive. And I need you to tell me what you want me to do. Do I let him go, or do I do everything possible to save him? And it was just like, and I know this is cliche and you read about this and you hear about this, but everything stood still at that moment. It was just me and Ed. I remember him in his blue scrubs, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, is this a joke? Like, is this one of these prank TV things? Like, I'm going to be like, pranked or something. And I'm looking at him and I'm looking at, the room, and I'm in a room, but my family is outside so they can see me. But I don't know what else he said. I really don't know if he told me what happened. He probably did tell me what the problem was. But at that time, I just remember saying something of, Jamie always said he'd rather die trying than die doing nothing. So I said, yes, do everything in your power to save him. And he went back into the OR, and I just sat there and I never came back out to talk to my family. It was, my parents were there, Jamie's mom and siblings were there, my sister was there, aunts, uncle, cousins. Like, it was a huge, huge thing. I just sat there like in total shock. And then I remember feeling that the room was too small and too bright, and I had to get out of there. And I just got up and I wanted to run away and get out of there. And I actually ran into the bathroom, which was even a more confined space. but yeah, my thought process was, I need to get out of here. I need to get away. I would say it was several hours. I want to say like early morning. There was no sleep. There was no anything really. And like I said, it's really weird that like it kind of comes and goes, almost like a dream sometimes. But I know Ed came back out. It was getting close to, the probably, I don't know, maybe 18, 20 hours in surgery. It was somewhere around that. And he came out and he sat down. He didn't take me in that little room again. So I was like, okay, he's not taking me back there. This is better. We're getting some progress here. And I remember just looking at him and I said, Ed, is he alive? And he said, he's alive. And I was like, okay. And he said, but it's not good. And I said, okay. And he told me then that they had stabilized him and put him on ECMO, which I had absolutely no idea what ECMO meant. I later learned that it was like very, very fancy life support that when there's nothing else left, this is what we do. And I just remember Ed saying something like, the next 24 hours are critical. And, I just need you to know that this does not look good. So he told me they were finishing up with him in the OR, and then I could go see him in the med surg ICU on the 10th floor at Toronto General. I'd never been there before. So yeah, so I went there. That was a very foreign place to me. I'd been in the other ICUs, the CV ICU and the CCU, the ones down on the second floor, but never in that one. And I remember like walking past people and just thinking, oh my God, this is where people go to die. I got to Jamie's room, and they were really, I have to say, the nurses were really good. He had 2.5 nurses, which I was like, that again triggered my mind that this has to be bad. Like, you get one-on-one nursing care, and that's like, that's the top level. But he had 2.5, which I knew instantly this is not good. And they prepared me in a sense of saying he's hooked up to a lot. The breathing tube was in for him, ECMO was going, I think ventilator was on, and dialysis was going at that point as well, because the kidneys were shutting down. And I walked in and I seriously thought I was in the wrong room. Jamie was he was less than 200 pounds when he went into surgery. So I'd say about 180. And he was close to 500 when he came out. He was unrecognizable, to the point where I remember turning around and saying to the nurse, I think this is the wrong room. And she was like, no. And I was like, I remember looking at him going, this is a sumo wrestler. This is not Jamie. Like, how can you say this is Jamie? And she's like, no. And I remember seeing the name on the door, Wilkinson is there. And I'm like thinking, this is so bizarre. And I'm just like, this is like again, another moment where I'm like, these people are crazy. They're pranking me. Like there's something nuts here. So seeing that, and then actually having a physical reaction to that, I still feel guilty about it, that the sight of him and seeing him that way actually made me, like, I was close to vomiting myself, and that whole, lightheaded, dizzy kind of feeling that you would get. But yeah, he was not recognizable in any
Yeah.
shape or form. Yeah.
No, that would be terrifying. I don't think having that visceral reaction is something you should feel. I mean, I'm sure you don't feel guilt about it now since you've had time to process it, but no, that would be so alarming for anyone. Why do you know why that happens?
It's because of the fluid. It's because the amount of fluid that's given in the OR. And if his kidneys weren't functioning at that point, his kidneys aren't pushing out the fluids quick enough, essentially.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Like he didn't even have a neck. Like it was just a head and then shoulders. It was crazy.
God.
And the only thing that made me realize, holy crap, this is him, was his toes were sticking out of the blanket outside the sheet. And he had the most ugly feet ever. Like his feet were gross all the time. And, and I remember looking at it and being like, oh my God, like, because his toes weren't swollen, his legs were, and everything else was. But yeah, I just was like, oh my God. So yeah, so I remember the reaction. I remember the same feeling of, I got to get out of here. Like this is just insane. And if there's anything that I could do now that I actually work at the hospital, would be to prepare people better for that scene, because I wish so much that that wasn't my last image of him burned in my brain, but it was. And after seeing him like that, the first shock wore off, and I did get to go back and feel a little bit better about it. But yeah, so Ed came, we chatted again. He had him stable enough so that Ed could go home. I don't know if it's a rule, if it's standards, but there was something about Ed had been in the OR for 24 hours and had to take a rest or a break or something. And he stabilized him enough so he could go home for that required time or whatever it was, and then come back. And, it just shows me the level of commitment that he had to saving him. I remember saying to him a couple times, like, how do you pee? And like, do you ever eat? And like, like, how does this work? So he went home, and then, yeah, no, they actually do go
Is there a
pee.
urinal? Like,
They actually go pee.
Yeah, super sanitary. Yeah.
Yeah. He told me they do pee and they do eat, because I was like, wow, like, is this guy going to like pass out from hunger? Like, what's going on here?
Are you good, Ed?
So he went home. Jamie stayed in ICU on ECMO. So I'm hitting 24, probably 30 hours now. There's still no sleep. There's still no eating. The next day kind of rolls around. So we're at probably the day after surgery. Ed comes back and we decide on the second surgery. There had been some issues with his belly. He was still pretty open when I saw him. I don't know what the technical term is for it. Britt, you probably do. When they keep them open but like put saran wrap on them.
No, I don't. I don't know what the technical term is, but I
know it's not saran wrap. That's what it looked like. They left him open, and I think it was because he was so swollen that they weren't able to get it closed. So they had to go back and do something with the tummy and the chest. And then we also made the decision, and this one, he just had open heart surgery, and I don't know why I found this so gross, for a lack of a better words. I think the term for it is fatigostomy, where his legs were swelling so much it was cutting the blood supply off. So they actually cut like the backs of his calves to relieve the pressure so that his feet would get blood flow. Yeah, so he went back into surgery for that to try and, save his feet. I don't think it was really successful. As time went on, I could tell that he was not going to come out of this. His fingers started to go blue and black, and so did his feet. So chat with Ed again, and I learned that the blood flow is not getting to the arms and legs. If I want to save him, we will have to amputate all limbs. And I don't know why that one hit me as hard as it did. I can remember going back from the ICU to the waiting room. My family was there, and I remember just sitting there crying and saying, they want me to cut him in pieces. And that's all I could. I was like, I can't chop him in pieces. I can't do it. And I even weighed out, I think he'd be okay if he had no legs. We had built our house wheelchair accessible. So I was like, if he was in a wheelchair, he would be okay. But if he had no arms and he's a musician, how would that work? How would, and, you know, I have to say again, our surgeon was awesome. I'm so glad it was someone we had a relationship with, because he said, Heather, I'll do whatever you tell me to do, but I need you to sit and think, would Jamie be happy if he can't play a guitar or play drums because he has no arms? And, you know, I was like, I can't do it. I don't think he would be happy. But at that point, I was still in the I'll do whatever it takes to save his life kind of mode. So I'm not sure who in their wisdom, but said, you know, he's been on ECMO. He was in the OR for like 24 hours. Let's check his brain to make sure that everything is functioning. So even just getting him to CT was, you know, a whole process. And they had told me we can get him there, but he could crash on the way. He's really unstable. And I agreed to the CT. When the CT came back, it showed that he had had several strokes during the procedure, and they had no idea if he'd wake up. And if he did wake up, would he be Jamie? Would he know me? Would he know himself? Would he be able to function? They didn't know. After that information, I was pretty confident, you know, in what I had to do next. I knew that he if he were to live, he would have to be put in an institution. I wouldn't be able to take him home. I wouldn't have been able to provide that level of care. A brain injured amputee, like it. So I knew that that wouldn't have been a life for him, and that wouldn't have been a life for me. And I didn't think that he would want to live that way. I was very, very lucky. We had a great cardiologist, and she had suggested way on in the beginning to do advanced healthcare directive, do a will, do a power of attorney, do a next of kin. And I remember when she said that, I was thinking, she is crazy. I just got married and you want me to do my will? I'm 29 years old. You are a nut job. But I'm so glad that, you know, she did say that, because we had all that. And he had an advanced directive. He didn't want to be on a feed tube. He didn't want to be on, you know, a lot of, I guess, unnecessary measures taken. And the other thing that, you know, is so touching that was in that directive was, if he were to pass, he wanted to donate his organs. So, and he had a note made that, I want to be an organ donor. Take whatever you need,
Stop.
except my heart, because that's a piece of shit. That's what it said on the directive.
Oh, Jamie.
And you know, I'm sitting there, and you know, I had an amazing team. I had the cardiologist from the VAD team was in the room with me when we opened this advanced directive. The guy that was in charge of the ICU, he was there, and Dr. Hickey from Ed Hickey, the surgeon, was there. And like, all these people minus the ICU doctor knew Jamie. And as bad as that moment was, we all just bust out laughing. Like, and I remember thinking, oh my God, here we are, like sitting down to read an advanced directive and decide to turn off life support. And we're all like laughing. But I really think that was his point, to make us laugh at that moment. And we went around the room, and it was almost like a vote. And I remember, you know, saying to the team, you know, what do you think? What do you think? And we all decided that this is what he would have wanted. He wouldn't have wanted to live in the state that he would have had to survive in. So on May 23rd, which was technically, you know, again, time is strange, 3 days after surgery, but you know, if you haven't been in ICU, there's no like time. It's just really weird. I think I might have went to sleep for a couple of hours somewhere in those 36 hours. Again, kudos to our team, because the cardiologist, she came out and spoke with my parents and was very stern and said, if you don't make Heather go to sleep, if you don't make her eat and you don't make her sit down, I'm going to have another patient. So kudos to her. I appreciated that. But May 23rd, we decided to turn off the machine. I had his original cardiologist from the congenital team there with me, his VAD cardiologist, who happened to be at a conference in Texas, flew back from Texas. She was there and I was there. And then the ICU head physician. And we put Twist and Shout from the Beatles up on full blast and we turned off the machine. And, I pictured it, and Courtney knows this. I love Grey's Anatomy, and I pictured it as this horrific, traumatic thing, but I had no idea that he even passed. And, that kind of gave me a sign that he was, I look at it as, I think, if people say to me, when did Jamie die? Yes, he died on the 23rd, but from the time he went to surgery until the 23rd, I feel like Jamie was already gone, and that was just a physical body or a shell. So, nothing, no big monitors went beeping mad or nothing crazy happened. It was just a very peaceful thing. And I had no idea till the physician said to me, he's gone.
Can you show us your wedding ring?
Yeah. So after Jamie passed, I was thinking of like, hey, how do I honor him, memorialize him, or do something? And, I had thought about getting a tattoo, and I, had it all pictured in my head about the ECG, the heartbeat. I was like, hey, I could do a little heartbeat. That'd be cool. Put it on my back. Jamie always had my back. This is so cute. Had it all ready to go. And I really am afraid of needles, and I hate needles. So
I was going to say.
I don't know why I thought that was going to be a great idea, but I chickened out and had the appointment booked and everything and never went. So I happened to come across something online where I saw these rings that had a heartbeat on it. And I was like, that's really cool. So I went to a jeweler. It was a jeweler in Newfoundland who had made my wedding rings. And I said, can you do this? And he said, yeah, sure. I said, yeah, just put, like the heartbeat on it and all that. And he was like, do you have a copy of Jamie's heartbeat? I could get one, I guess. So the team gave me one, and it was the very last ECG of Jamie's old original heart. They were awesome, and they were like, would you like the original heart or the transplanted heart? And I was like, hey, no, I want the original. The transplanted one I didn't know. I want the original. So they gave me the last one, and I brought that pink ECG sheet to the jeweler and said, I want you to put this on a ring. And he said, what did you do with the wedding rings I made you? And I was like, yeah, they're in a jewelry box somewhere. And he said, how about we melt those together, and I'll use that as the base for the ring. And I was like, oh, this guy's a genius. This is why I go to him for everything. And it came out just, take my breath away.
Spectacular.
It was spectacular when I saw it the first time. And, what's neat about it is that I got it the day before I left to go away to school for my PhD. So I feel like I kind of took a piece of him to school with me. Yeah, so I've never taken it off since I've got it. It's there, and just this year I still had the diamond from the engagement ring that he picked. I didn't wear it, but I loved it. It was such a beautiful diamond. So I brought it to a jeweler here in Toronto, and we designed another ring and using the diamond that he had selected. But I kind of made this one a little different. I made this one about me. I'm a big fan of pink. So the diamond is surrounded by pink sapphires.
Nice.
It's the ultimate girly pink ring. So, there's a little piece of him with me, I guess, at all times.
Next time on Living Transplant.
I love being able to look at someone and say, I know what you're experiencing and actually mean that. So very common for people from Newfoundland to want to go home. The research question ended up being, how is home connected to the transplant journey? Courtney asked me probably a year ago, if you could have any job, what would it be? What would your dream job be? And I told her my dream job was to work in transplant at Toronto General. And I said, oh my God, I need a new dream. I have my dream job.